This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
Hello and welcome to Nick Hood Ministries. Today I want to focus on a theme, real simple. You can handle this. You can handle this. Every week people have been calling my number, the number on the screen right now, all over the country, and many of them are calling saying, I want prayer because I have cancer. I want prayer because I'm sick. I want prayer because somebody I love is sick. And today I have a medical doctor with me and a friend of mine who's a pastor from Atlanta, and we're going to be talking about what the Bible tells us in terms of how you can handle cancer. How you can handle cancer. Stick around, we'll be back in just a few minutes.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
I believe that there's an answer for everything in the Bible. And today, I have a special message to those who are looking at this program who have cancer. Maybe there's somebody looking at this who has diabetes. And we'll come back to diabetes, but today I want to talk about cancer and the good news. And I want to start with one of the members of my church, Dr. Arande White, who's a medical doctor, internal medicine doctor, to talk about the good news on the front in terms of cancer. And then I'm going to work back to the Bible, and I'm going to tell you what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, verse 27. Real simple. Paul says, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. And today, I want to talk about this from the concept of you can handle this. You can handle this. As I mentioned at the outset, every week since we started this program, people call at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, Detroit, and they call for prayer. From New Mount Vernon, New York, from Mobile, Alabama, Texas, Los Angeles, all over the country, people are calling and they want prayer. And so I said, I'm going to bring a man on the show today who can tell us what's the good news in cancer. Dr. Oronde White, how are you?
Okay, how are you doing, Reverend?
All right, thank you for joining the program today. We also have the Reverend Dr. Dwight Andrews, who's going to speak in just a minute. He's the pastor of the First Congregational Church in Atlanta, Georgia. But Dr. White, we're going to begin with you. What's the good news? What would you tell a patient if they're diagnosed with cancer? Do you ever tell them you can handle this?
Yes, I do.
Really?
So, I mean, one of the big pieces of the good news of cancer today is that even just 30 years ago, we have a number of treatment options that are much better than what we had in the past. So, and we have new treatment options coming online routinely nowadays. Almost every month or two, there's another update or an advance. But the good news in cancer today is that you have more treatment options. Many people are living longer, and many more people than in the past are able to go into what we will call a remission, which some people like to use the term cure in layman's terms, but remission means, you get enough treatment to where the evidence of the cancer is gone and remains absent.
Mm-hmm. And so let's start from the beginning. If a person is diagnosed with cancer, how can they make the most out of their relationship with their primary care doctor?
Well, really, I know we're picking up at the point of a patient is diagnosed with cancer, but what I would like to emphasize, which would benefit a tremendous amount of people, is the part before you get to the diagnosis of cancer. And which is the relationship with their primary care doctor before the diagnosis. So the thing is, this is crucially important because today, when you're diagnosed with cancer, the stage at which it's diagnosed is critically important regarding your prognosis and what the likely outcome will be. So the issue is if you see your primary care doctor, but first of all, have a primary care doctor to see, you'll do much better if you are on top of the preventive side of medicine. So even when somebody's diagnosed with cancer, but before that, myself, I have more of a holistic philosophy. Even though I'm trained in traditional allopathic medicine, and I keep up to date with that, the issue is that most medical interventions are actually secondary, what we call secondary treatment or secondary prevention. The first issue is if you have a good relationship with your primary care doctor, see them regularly and follow their advice on screening for the cancers that we know are common and prevalent and that you're most likely to get, you'll get a diagnosis at an earlier stage, which has a tremendous impact on how you will do with cancer.
Dr. Andrews, you're pastoring in Atlanta, Georgia. Do you see many patients with cancer, many of your members?
Yeah, unfortunately we do. We have a lot of people who have many different types of cancers. And sometimes we're really surprised because people will have cancers of the lungs or the esophagus who never smoked. There are a lot of kind of anomalies, but they still get cancer nonetheless. And one of the things that I think I've learned as a non-medical person is the power of the spirit in one's own health and wellness. So I really see a person's attitude and faith and positivity as being a part of their protocol for well-being. That will be as important as the radiation or the various protocols. Attitude and trusting God, I think, is an important medicine that we can all tap into.
Let me take a spiritual break for just a moment and just give the context of where Paul is in Philippians chapter 4:27. Paul is under house arrest in Rome. He's been sent to Rome by the Jewish hierarchy in Jerusalem, and they have charged him with sedition against Rome. Israel was under Roman control. Paul, as a Roman citizen, has been sent to Rome for an audience, a trial before Caesar. And so there he's under house arrest. The church at Philippi has written him. They've sent a personal visitor. They want to know, is Paul being well treated? Is he being well fed? Does he need anything? Does he need clothes? Does he need his books? What does he need? And Paul writes back to them a very short letter. It only has 4 chapters. But essentially, what he's saying in the 27th verse of the 4th chapter is, I can do all things through him, and we say through Christ, who strengthens me. And I think that what Paul is saying here is, when he says, I can do all things, he's saying, in layman's terms, I can handle this. In the street, he might be saying, I got this. But I can handle this. Today, we're talking about cancer. And with Dr. Arande White, who is helping us to think through how can the cancer patient handle cancer. So give me some other thoughts about this, Dr. White. You began by saying the first step is have a relationship with your primary care doctor.
Yes.
What about medicines that the doctor prescribes for the person? And I guess that would be not just, if you have cancer, it would be not just the primary care doctor, but an oncologist too, right?
Yes. After the diagnosis of cancer, yes.
And is the oncologist the one who would prescribe the majority of the medicines?
Oh, yes. Now, after you have a cancer diagnosis, then you usually are under the care of an oncologist. And for most cancers, one of the critical decision points lies in what we call, when you have the diagnosis, you have to do what we call staging, which is what I referred to previously. So whether or not the cancer is in the earliest stage or the most advanced stage or in between. So basically, the more advanced the cancer is at the time of diagnosis, generally you won't do as well as if it's at an earlier stage at the time of diagnosis. So the oncologist, once the diagnosis is made, a lot of times, so a lot of it will fall on the oncologist, but really for most cancers, the issue is whether or not it's at an early enough stage that surgery could potentially be curative, or whether or not you're beyond the point that surgery would be a viable option for you. For most cancers, some cancers, surgery doesn't really come into the equation to begin with, but for the most part, most cancers, are you a surgical candidate or not? If you're a surgical candidate, generally you'll do better than if the cancer is so far advanced, surgery would not be a reasonable option.
The other day, I was in the hospital, and an endocrinologist, I'm not sure what that means. What is an endocrinologist?
So basically, an endocrinologist, that's a specialist of the glands and what we call like the hormone system of the body. So we have several different hormone systems of the body that we call the endocrine system. So the endocrine system comprises glands throughout the body at various locations. And that system is very important because it's sort of like behind the scenes, sort of like the coordinator of your body's functions as far as metabolism and the processes, how efficiently they work in the body, regulating things like blood glucose, a lot of these things that we don't think about, if you're a non-medical person.
So this endocrinologist walks into the patient, my church member, and I just happen to be there. And while I'm there, the endocrinologist is giving the patient a speech and saying, you don't have to be a doctor to ask good questions. He said, matter of fact, it's to your advantage as a patient to ask your doctor. He said, go into your purse, ma'am, pull out all of your medications, put them right on the table in front of your doctor and say, tell me why I need to take this. And number one, and number two, if I take this and all of these other 8 medicines that I've been prescribed to take, how are they going to interact with each other? And what's to my advantage? And what are your thoughts about this? Just briefly, we only have a minute, but you know, some people, the older they get, often have many medicines.
Oh, yes.
What's your response to what I heard the endocrinologist say?
Well, what the endocrinologist said is actually correct, in my opinion. So the issue is that frequently, so I'm an internist, so I'm sort of like overall coordinator of medical care, and usually involved integrally in the initial diagnosis of cancer. But as far as the medications and interactions, that's a very crucial aspect of medical care, because very frequently, I'd say at least one of every 4 or 5 patients that I see, there are medication combinations that I don't like, that I usually try to change because of known interactions with the medications. And paying attention to those things oftentimes has resulted in tremendous improvement for patients. So I agree with the doctor in saying that, is that one, as a patient, it's very important for you to know what each of your medications does. And also knowing drug-drug interactions is vital, because the interactions can be potentially even fatal in a small percentage of cases, but when they're not fatal, your quality of life and just having these side effects can really be distressing, to the point that a lot of people end up not complying with their medication regimens because sometimes they don't ask enough questions and figure out that sometimes the medications are not, what we call it, jiving with each other or blending. And sometimes 1 or 2 changes is all it takes, and they'll be able to tolerate their medications. But too many people just say, the medicine's making me sick, so they don't really comply with the regimen, and they don't tell their doctor or ask enough questions to know that sometimes the medications are causing their symptoms.
Dr. White, I want to thank you for adding some clarity to how a patient can make the best use of their relationship with a primary care doctor, but also their better understanding of the medicines, the medications that have been prescribed. We're going to take a break now, but we'll be right back. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a group of people who fall through the cracks, who maybe don't have a primary care physician. We'll be right back. Thanks so much for tuning in. Put your questions together, and I want you to know I'm praying for you. We'll be right back.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
Thanks so much for sticking with us. Today I have Dr. Oronde White, who is a medical doctor, and the Reverend Dr. Dwight Andrews, pastor of the First Congregational Church in Atlanta. And during the break, Reverend Andrews, you had I thought, a powerful question for Dr. White. And why don't you share your question about primary care physicians?
Dr. White, you were really helpful in describing the importance of a relationship with a primary care physician. But then I was thinking about the many people that I know who don't have a primary care physician and whose primary medical intervention is in the emergency room. And so I'm wondering, are there ways that we should think about that population? How can we advocate for those that don't have primary care physicians?
So unfortunately, those patients face a big challenge without having health insurance or a primary care physician. And usually they don't have a primary care physician because they don't have health insurance. And this is a big problem here in America. That's sort of like what the principle of trying to establish Obamacare was all about. Unfortunately, we still have millions of people without health insurance. So the issue to be aware of is that when you utilize emergency services like the ER, that's not a good place to have a primary care physician because they're not primary care physicians. Just to try to you know.
But they're good at stitching you up if you're cut.
Yes.
Right?
So basically, the emergency doctors, their primary focus is to establish whether or not you have a condition severe enough that's potentially life-threatening or disabling that you need to be admitted to the hospital or not. And if you don't need to be admitted to the hospital, they want to do whatever they can to get you out of the hospital that day, and to basically try to have you follow up with a primary care physician, because the primary care physician is your primary resources to staying healthy.
Now, Dr. White, we only have a few minutes left, but I've got another question. In the patients that you have seen, and you've been a doctor for a number of years, what role does spirituality play in the well-being, the wellness of a patient? It's one thing to be sick, but it's another thing to be sick without faith.
Yes.
And have you seen much of a difference?
Well, you know, it's been observed that people who have faith or spirituality tend to do better in the setting of illness. And, you know, scientifically, we have an explanation for that, actually. It's been observed that when people are positive and they are not as distressed and they don't have a negative outlook, that they literally have a physiologic difference versus people who are negative, hopeless, and despair. And then in a physiologic sense, we call it the stress hormone system of the body. And the more you spend in a distressed state, your body literally does self-destructive things to itself. So having a positive spiritual outlook, being optimistic and feeling like you have hope, and being positive and proactive about how you're going to approach your health care, we know from a scientific standpoint, physiologically, there's a big difference there as far as how your body responds to that. So I believe being positive, hopeful, proactive, and having a good spirituality is a very good thing that is beneficial for patients.
Reverend Andrews, in Atlanta, do you find many situations where groups of people are gathered together to pray for somebody who's sick?
Yes, that's oftentimes our protocol for helping someone who's dealing with illness. And we find it to be very effective. When you know people are praying for you and with you, I think that has a strong bearing on how people feel about confronting their illness, because they're not alone as they're dealing with the illness, when they have a community of people helping them along that way. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I was thinking was that maybe this is a call for all churches to be better advocates, because we're missing something without a healthcare system that allows for that primary care piece. And so maybe we need to help connect people to clinics as well as to changing the way in which we do health in America.
I tell you, I believe in prayer. And I have lived long enough to see so many prayers answered. Just the other day, a young woman called me. She was going into labor. And she said, Reverend Hood, I'm getting ready to go into labor, and I want you to pray for me. I'm in the labor room, and I want you to pray for me. And I laughed to myself. I said, boy, that's some intimate prayer. But you know, that's one of the beautiful things about being a pastor. But, you know, we only have a minute or so left. But, Dr. White, you know, have you, you know, in your practice, all the years that you've been practicing, what are some of the more impressive or astounding experiences that you've had? I mean, I'm not asking you to break your Hippocratic oath, you know, and violate it. But, you know, you are a Christian. And how is it as a scientist, a man of science, a man of medicine, but you're also a Christian? And how do you put the two together?
Well, not that difficult from my standpoint. I mean,
Tell me why.
Well, you know, previously I gave a lecture, a seminar at church previously explaining about there are actual directives toward healthy eating in the Bible as far as what you should and shouldn't eat. And so the Bible, right in the beginning in Genesis, there's a prescription as to what is for us, as it refers to as meat or a primary staple for sustenance, and what are things we should avoid. So the thing is for me, from a medical standpoint, one of the most rewarding, powerful things that I've seen is when I sit down and actually talk to patients, and like what I call just in a very straightforward, matter-of-fact way, about the importance of lifestyle habits like diet, exercise, what you drink, how you support your body's biological processes through proper nutrition and lifestyle. I have over and over, I've lost count, had patients who came to me and filled up half of my table on the desk when I was seeing them with just like at least a dozen prescription bottles, sometimes 20 or more. And when I talk to them about what all these medicines do and how they can improve their life, I've had so many patients over and over say, I never really, like the way you're explaining this to me, I actually understand what you're saying, and you're really saying that if I do these, 5 things you're talking about, you believe that I can actually get healthier? And I say, yes, I really believe that, and I've seen it happen before. And I've had a number of patients, when they started to get serious about diet, well, first of all, most of the patients said they never even knew. They just say, well, they say you buy food in the grocery store. When I explain to them the drastic differences between all of the types of food you can buy in a grocery store and how it affects the body, I had a lot of people who decided, I'm going to get serious, and I'm done with all this, that, and the other, and I'm going to do this, that, and the other.
So you're seeing a direct change.
Oh, I've had patients.
Dr. White, we're about out of time.
No medications.
Listen,
I've seen them no medications after a year.
You got me excited. We were about out of time, but I want to thank again Dr. Oronde White. He's a medical doctor, internal medicine doctor, Reverend Dr. Dwight Andrews from Atlanta. Thank you for being with me, and Dr. White, I hope you'll come back and be with me again, because at some point I want to talk about diabetes, and but we'll save that for another time.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in today. This is the Nick Hood Ministry program, and we're out of time. But if this has been a blessing to you, I want you to think about blessing this program. We need your support. Look at the number that's on the screen, and I would appreciate a donation of any amount. And if you do that, I have a book that I've written of prayers and photographs. I'll send it to you, complimentary. God bless, God keep you, and remember, I'm praying for you. I believe in prayer, and remember the verse we said today. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Let me hear you repeat it. Repeat with me. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. God bless you, and I'm praying for you.